Hi guys, you probably noticed there was a new Assetto Corsa Competizione update, and there were plenty of videos already, but they all going pretty much only in the content direction. And what I want to do today is take one of the cars, in this case the new McLaren 720S, because it will always also be part of the McLaren Shadow project and the qualifying phase for it. So you might kind of want to know how this car should be driven. And I noticed it actually has to be driven quite differently compared to the other cars we had in the game so far. This was especially visible on the braking. In the first couple laps, every time I stepped on the brakes, the car would just go straight because I was braking as I was used to in the game and all the other cars, where you basically hit the brake as hard as you can and then just turn in and let the ABS sort it out for you. But in this car, apparently, this doesn't work. I haven't figured it out yet. It's not because the tires are locking up, and it also doesn't change when you use a higher ABS value. So it could be down to a very sensitive aerodynamic base of the car. As the car pitches forward, the aero might stall and doesn't give you the turn in. But as soon as you release the brake just a tiny bit, the car starts to turn again and actually gets quite twitchy here and there mid-turn, so you have to really adapt your driving style to make this car work in your way. Then yesterday I had a small online session with a couple friends. You might notice their names or not in the hot lap later as they're on the screen. But I managed to do, I think, 2 to 18.2 in the end, which, given that their tarmac has become slower in the 2.19 version after the update, I think is a decent time, given that I haven't really changed much to the setup yet, just some tiny changes that I kind of am used to do by now, given the experience I have from all the other cars and what does work and what does not. So this is fairly stock overall, I'd say. And I also added some telemetry output for you just to give that stuff a try this time around, because people have been asking for that, and I've been looking into how I can actually use visualization of telemetry in a video. And here's my first take. Well, I'll show you a mini map while replaying the, well, hot lap in this case. Let's take a look. So, what you're now going to watch is watch me watch myself. And no, probably not. What I've added to the video is a direct output of the motec software, where you can create a map of the track and you can add some data as visualization. What I chose for the first video that I do with this kind of stuff is the brake and throttle input that I give during the lap. So what you can see, the more dark and more saturated the green is, the more throttle I use. So right now, through Rouge and all of this chemistry, of course, I use the brake, the throttle 100%, of course. And as soon as the thing turns red, we can see how much I use the brake. So what you can see here is I use the brake fully at the beginning, and then I release more until I am at the apex. When something is white on the map, you can actually see there is no throttle or brake input. So actually that is where I simply coast using the engine brake, which is generally something you don't want to do in a racing car, because you either want to accelerate or brake, else it kind of indicates that you're losing time there, because you haven't adapted your speed as good as you could have done. Here you can also see if there are some tiny bright green spots where I slightly lift the throttle to correct the line. And here in this corner you can see there's not much trail braking going on, while there's a lot of corrections being done on the throttle, for example. And also in this one there's going to be some more trail braking right until the apex again. And in this one again you will see me doing a slight lift to just clip the outside curb so I don't invalidate the lap. Yeah, all of this up until the chicane is pretty much flat out. I use all the track that I can get without going off track limits, and then again you can see the brake input and then releasing off the brakes, going through the chicane, little lift of the throttle, and then increasing the throttle towards the end of the lap. But let's also have a little more detailed look. Let's start with corner number 1, and I will stop the video for a second to just make it a little easier to actually follow what I'm doing there. First of all, we can say that initially when I'm approaching the corner, and right when I'm about to go from the throttle to the brake, you can see in the minimap there's a tiny bit of a white line. It's basically just a couple of pixels wide, but it tells you that my switch from the throttle to the brake pedal isn't immediately. What we would actually want is the white line to disappear, because there's probably a couple thousands, if not hundreds or so, that I'm not accelerating anymore, but I'm also not braking anymore. And then, if we look really close, we can see that it takes a couple of, well, it's not seconds, it's rather few time, but still I'm not 100% on the brakes right away, because I don't know, either I'm not going fast enough, I'm not going hard enough, but there's some time until I really use maximum force to slow down the car, which in this case isn't something you should copy, but it's something you should avoid. And well, I should myself, just looking at the lap, I learned that about my driving style as well. If we then approach the later stages in the braking zone, and I've shifted down a little to second, maybe already first, then you can see that I open up the brake just a little bit. And at the same time, if you look at the steering wheel, I will start to turn a little more, because before it doesn't make any sense. The McLaren will just go straight as long as I'm fully on the brakes. So I kind of learned to align me lifting off the brakes and slightly going into the turn with the steering. And then also, especially in turn 1, you can see it quite good that I brake rather long, nearly into the apex or right before it, and there's a really small amount of time where I actually don't use any of the pedals. So this is something you want to copy in most corners. Not all, maybe. There might be some corners where you don't want that to be, because you actually need coasting to just settle the car, or just scrap away the tiny bit of speed that you still have in excess to make the apex. But in turn 1, you can really turn the car with trail braking and use the inside curb to get the rotation into the car that you need in order to straighten the car and go on the throttle early. If then we keep going, Rouge in this car is pretty much not a difficulty anymore. Since the first lap, I really was able to do a Rouge flat. Sometimes I went straight, but I never had the problem of losing all downforce and spinning and crashing into the wall. It was pretty much straightforward in this car. Now, when we're approaching the Lecombe area, let me stop the video for a second again. You can also see once more that going from acceleration to braking, there's a very small white area. I'd actually say it's smaller than what we had in the first corner. So I'm doing it a little better here. And it's hard to compare now if I'm fully on the brakes right away, if I actually am faster doing that compared to the first corner. But you can see that I'm really going quite deep into the corner on the brakes again. So there's a little trail braking going on, followed by a bit of coasting, which is something I like to do when I'm on the curb. I like to be a little too fast, actually, because the curb gives some kind of rotation, but being too fast makes the car understeer a little. So there's kind of a trade-off between going over the curb, getting rotation, and going too fast, which is understeer. And they kind of pan each other out, and you can make the turn quite nicely. Then shifting from the left to the right, let's actually go there. You can see there's a little throttle input just to just use that little bit of speed that you can use there. Let me stop right again, because you can see through the turn there's a lot of coasting, but I'm just using a bit of throttle. So there's a very light green visible in the corner. And then I'm not fully accelerating while I'm still turning, because when you do that here, the rear will kick out, you will lose some traction, and you will have to make a correction and back out of the throttle even more. So there's just, I don't know, let it be 60-70% of throttle you can use out of the left hander of Le Comp to just get the car on the outside again for turn number 3 of Le Comp, where you again want to use the inside curb. And what you will also be able to see is they shift up right on the turn in to, say, I would stay in second gear and turn in. I would have so much engine brake that I will actually go too far to the inside and I will lose speed going to the exit. And also the second gear is kind of too short for the corner, and if I hit the throttle fully to accelerate, I might get oversteer. So I shift up into third to have a little less power available. So it's basically a short shift before going into the turn. And then once I feel that I got the car in the right position facing the curb, then I can hit the throttle fully. And you can also see there's a tiny brighter green bit mid corner, which shows you that I wasn't as confident as I wanted to be. So I backed out the throttle just a little bit because I was going too fast for the exit of the corner. I probably wouldn't have made it. So I back out a little just for, I don't know, must be a tenth, maybe 2, before I go flat on the throttle again to stay within the track limits. So slight oversteer through there. And then the next corner, especially, it's not actually on the minimap yet. Let me speed it up a little more. There you go. We can see the braking point. Again, we have this small white area that we want to minimize as much as we can. But there's also, going into that corner, just to say the area where I actually brake 100% is fairly small. And that is because we are already braking rather late, just when the curb starts. And this is like a double apex corner. So you're not braking in a straight line and waiting for the middle of the corner to appear where you want to be, but actually want to be inside the corner quite early, go a little wide, scrap off some more speed, and hit a second apex towards the exit of the corner. And especially here, it helps to extend the braking zone far into the turn, which is why what you will see here, that the red keeps decreasing right until the middle of the corner, where then I am the furthest outside, and then I start again to hit the throttle slightly to line the car up for the second apex. And then once I know that I can clip it the way I wanted it, maybe not, it's never ideal, right? You can always improve it up. But then I can, when I've lined it up, the car's almost straight, and I can become more confident in using 100% throttle before I go for no-name corner, where again you will see just a tiny brake input, because if you hit it too hard there, you're pretty much going straight. This was just about in track limits. You can use the curb in no-name as well. And now for, actually just forgot the name of that one, but however, same thing as in all corners. We have a tiny white bar. It looks smaller than the other corners before right now, so it did a better job there, I think. And then you can see the red part on the track decreasing ever more as I'm approaching the apex of the corner. But I take quite some time to release the brake fully, so I slow the car down more than I would if I would just coasting into the corner, which makes it possible for me to brake a tiny bit later, carry more speed until the apex, where I might be a kilometer or two slower than if I would be coasting. But being on the brakes also creates some kind of rotation in the car that you always want. And once once I feel comfortable that I got the apex and I think that I can make the turn without going too wide, I start using the throttle again, which in this case didn't work out. So you will see the tiny bright green bits popping up where I actually lift off the throttle. Let me pause for a second. What you can see, I brake quite hard for this one, and I don't trail brake as much into that corner because I personally feel that it doesn't work in this corner too much. But instead, I don't use third but second gear in rather high RPMs, which leads to the car slowing down with the engine brake a little bit more instead of using the brake. And for me in this one, it feels more stable, and it's easier for me to go fast through the corner. Basically, it's quite difficult to explain. And this corner is, as it's so long and rather, it's not exactly slow, but it's also not high-speed corner. You have some twitchy aerodynamics, and with the second gear, where there's a lot of power, especially in these high RPMs, the car will quickly oversteer. So that's what you can see at the green and white interchanging going through the right-hander, and the same is true for the left-hander afterwards. Well, I use mainly only the throttle to correct the position of the car, correct the oversteer of the car, correct the understeer of the car, all on the throttle alone. And you will also see that I turn in to the left-hander in second gear, but then shift up to third to do something similar to the exit of the comp, where the second gear would be too short and would cause too much oversteer, while the third gear has just about enough torque to accelerate decently, but it's not so much that you would oversteer. Approaching the last two difficult corners before coming to the back straight. Let me go a couple further. There you go. It's also just a very tiny white bar, so the switch from throttle to brake, I think I kind of made all right there. And the braking zone is rather short, but I trail brake also quite far until the apex. And then for this one, you want to throw it in. And if you hit it right, you just stay in third gear in the McLaren at least. You try to clip the inside curb, which will give you some more rotation than what the car initially has. And that definitely helps with making the car able to go flat through the corner. And I'm on, I think it's still 50 to 60 liters in the car. So this also works in race fuel. But I didn't nail it as good as I wanted to. So you will see mid-turn that I have to, or closer to the exit, that I actually have to lift slightly to stay within the truck limits. Pretty much just a couple of centimeters that I missed it there. And then for the last chicane, it's very crucial to hit the inside curb, because this one throws the car around quite a bit, and if you hit it in the right angle, it will just turn it around enough without getting you too much oversteer. But it probably just takes laps and some confidence. You can go over that curb way faster than you think, probably 10-20 kilometers faster than you would initially feel, just as a rough benchmark. You can see the trail braking ending before I hit the curb, and I use just a tiny bit of throttle to create that small understeer to cope with the rotation the curb gives me. Didn't really hit the left one there, but somehow the McLaren was able to cope with it. And yeah, I hope this was some insight for you. Let me know in the comments and I'll follow up as usual.